Raymond Joseph has made a name for himself in recent years. He has an illustrious, long career in journalism, but over the last few years, he's been working hard at uncovering how funding from the national lotteries has been abused and not used or intended, or not used as intended for when the application has been made. He has uncovered billions of rands of corruption, which has actually made positive change in some regard, with changes to the National Lotteries Board, investigations by the Department of Trade and Industry. But in his latest articles on GroundUp, he's reported on a leaked forensic report revealing how millions of rand granted to the Cape Town Minstrel Carnival Association. And it's that time of the year again. It's a very, very important institution and tradition in the city of Cape Town, the annual Minstrel Carnival. But he's been looking at money that was supposed to have gone to a minstrel museum. Shows no museum at all. Ray Joseph, really appreciate your time. You've reported on this
Morning.
before, that there was money granted to the Cape Town Minstrel Carnival Association for a museum honouring the heritage of the Minstrel Carnival in Cape Town. But on close inspection, no such museum ever existed.
Morning, Lester. Yes. So the amount, in fact, was 13 million rand, of which 5 million rand was earmarked for a building to house the museum. I've been looking for this museum since 2020, 4 years. So it was part of... So over the years, the Cape Town Minstrel Carnival Association has received over 64 million rand for a variety of very dodgy projects, and the museum was part of a just over 27 million rand grant to develop the museum, to buy equipment to make uniforms and hats, etc., for the minstrels. I first started looking for the museum, as I said, it's 4 or 5 years ago, and it led me to a building in the Wetton Industrial Area, Crete Road, where Port Stammet, who's a convicted criminal, he's constantly has been in trouble with the law. Several of his businesses were operating from there. Hat making factory, clothing making factory, a nightclub. And I managed to get into the building. Well, I set up an appointment with Mr. Stammet, who ended up threatening me and chasing me away and warning me to leave it alone. But on the day, this is back in 2020, I wandered around the building and I happened across a small hall there in which there were some pictures stuck on cardboard of minstrels, the Pennsylvanian troupe, in which Mr. Stammet is heavily involved, and a small boat with on a plinth with minstrels on it. Subsequently, after I wrote that story, there was a bit of a flurry, and suddenly this building was repainted, and a tarpaulin was hung over one of the doors saying there was a minstrel museum and restaurant in there. I never managed to get in again, and I wasn't going to risk it to go and confront him again. But everyone in the area said to me, listen, there's no such a thing as a museum there.
Does the National Lotteries Commission do any post-provision checks after they've granted funding for a particular project to make sure you've actually used the money for the intended purpose?
Well, you think they would. So back then, and as the investigation found, they hadn't done anything like that, but they didn't hold the people involved responsible because they weren't required to do it at that stage. But that's one of the ways how the lottery was looted of all those millions, especially on big infrastructure projects where there was no pre-checking or post-checking. When, for example, in this, I mean, today it's changed completely, where the new administration and the new board check check very heavily. They go before they give any money to make sure that this place exists. They check up on who is involved. Are they in good standing? But it wasn't happening then. But Lester, after that, so what happened? If I could continue with the story, because it's far dodgier than just not a museum there. They then got involved in. They hadn't paid rent. Richard Skewitt's companies, the Cape Town Minstrel Carnival, hadn't paid rent at those premises for over 4 years. They owe the former owner something like 2.5 million rand. And suddenly in 2021, overnight, they disappeared from there, taking with them a whole bunch of equipment which had been paid for lottery money, paid for with lottery money, and had been attached by the sheriff on behalf of the owner of the building, and disappeared into the night. And then moved to other premises in Athlone Industrial Area, in the Athlone Industrial Area, on the fringes of the industrial area there, close to Manenberg, where once again there was supposedly a museum there, but there was no indication on the outside whatsoever that there had been a museum. I went around there and there was no ways of knowing, or the closest indication that there might be something about minstrels was on a sign. There was a tiny picture of the face of a minstrel, but it said nothing about a museum. And the leaked report that I got has actually got photographs of the inside of the museum. And it's a bunch of minstrel uniforms were hung on the wall. There were a few musical instruments, but there was nothing about the history. There was no context. Yeah. And the investigators found the same thing. But just finally there, the third leg is, out of the 5 million that they were allocated to acquire a museum, they then bought a property in Skarpskraal, in the middle of nowhere, literally in the middle of nowhere, in a peri-urban area. And they then they paid 1.7. They resold it for 1.7. They said that they had done that because they couldn't get planning permission to build a museum there. And I mean, it's crazy. The money was never ever spent on a museum.
So Raymond, explain to me, how does it work if Lester Kiewit goes to the National Lottery and says, I want to create a museum of, let's say, what do I enjoy? Cape Town chip rolls. What do I have to show to the National Lotteries Commission that, firstly, I am worth my salt? I know a thing about making chip rolls. These are my plans. This is where I'm going to build it. This is who I'm going to employ. This is a business plan. And this is a feasibility study on why it would be culturally interesting. And yes, it's very important, Cape Town minstrel tradition and history. But what do you show the National Lotteries Commission that you actually intend to do with the money that will be allocated?
Well, first of all, you would have to be a non-profit organization in good standing. You would have to show that there was a need for such a thing, and importantly, that you had the expertise to pull it off, and that you had the correct people involved. Yes, and I think in good standing, because very often money, so you need to differentiate between the former board and administration and the executive and the new one, because it's chalk and cheese. I mean, previously, so in this case, Lester, understand there was very, very little checking. It didn't happen by accident. There's compelling circumstantial evidence to suggest that a lot of that money for the museum, and it wasn't only the museum. Remember, we're talking about 64 million rand, of which 55, we're talking about 2014. This all happened. This has been going on forever. 2013, 14, 15, around the time of the 2014 elections, a lot of that money, there's compelling evidence to suggest that money ended up funding the election campaign of a faction of the ANC, which was very, very divided in the Western Cape. Their election campaign. The evidence is there.
Raymond, you've done exceptional work over the last few years that have seen some considerable changes, from intervention from the former Minister of DTI to the changing of the board, a new commission and commissioners. Is there still lots to uncover in what has gone wrong with the National Lotteries Commission?
So, Lester, until very recently, the SIU were talking about under investigation 1.4 billion rand. Advocate Andy Mutivi, the head of the SIU, about 2 months ago in Parliament, updated that figure to 2 billion. I believe that the true amount is closer to double that, if not more. But I doubt whether we will ever know the full extent, because it's like looking for a needle in the haystack. Unless a whistleblower comes forward and tells you where to look, you don't know where to look. It's sad, but listen, I think we're starting again, and vigilance, not only from me, but from all journalists and people on radio, people on TV, everyone needs to keep their eye on this to make sure that it doesn't happen again. We need this institution. It's to do the work that it should be doing, and if it was, it could do amazing work.
Raymond Joseph, the GroundUp investigative journalist.